You're listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks.
Hi, I'm Dr. Brenna Hicks, the Kid Counselor. This is the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast, where I give you insight, awareness, and enlightenment about your parenting and your relationship with your kids. In today's episode, we are discussing the universal outcomes of child-centered play therapy. And this is part of the Parent Companion, Season 3. This is so that you have a sense of what your child is going to gain independent of the specific work that your child does. In other words, if your child is especially anxious, your child will absolutely make gains on their anxiety. If your child has low self-esteem, they will absolutely make gains on their self-esteem. If they tend to be aggressive, they will work on their aggressive behavior. So children are going to work on their own individual struggles and issues. But regardless of why a child comes into the child-centered play therapy room and starts the child-centered play therapy process, there are 4 universal outcomes that are proven in research that are going to take place for your child. So often, this is kind of the bonus. You get the ice cream sundae with the whipped cream and the sprinkles and then the cherry on top, which you don't really need, but it's kind of nice because it's like that little extra thing that just makes it a little bit better. Okay, the universal outcomes kind of serve as that purpose because your child is going to work through their own individual stuff, which is why you seek therapy in the first place. If your child is well-adjusted and happy and thriving and is handling life well, then there's usually not a need for therapy. However, if your child is struggling with something, they will work through those struggles in CCPT. And then in addition to that, they get these 4 universal outcomes. So I want to unpack those for you, make sense of what your child will gain. And really the beauty of CCPT and the outcomes are that they are lifelong. Even into adulthood, your children benefit from these things that they gain. They are going to have this impact their job, their marriage, their parenting, the rest of their lives. They're going to have a sense of how CCPT equipped them with these 4 things. So let's look at them. So the first is an emotional vocabulary. Every child needs a more robust emotional vocabulary. Let me expand that since I'm speaking to mostly adults right now. Every single human being needs an expanded emotional vocabulary. There are far too many adults in this world that have no sense of their feelings. They have no idea what they're feeling. They have no idea how to communicate their feelings. If you don't have an emotional vocabulary and an emotional IQ, you are stunted in so many ways. And so for a child, when they participate in child-centered play therapy, because one of the things that we do so often is reflect their feelings, they start to build an emotional vocabulary. Another phrase that you might have heard is an emotional IQ. Well, if you are an emotionally intelligent person, you have a sense of what you're feeling, you know how to identify what you're feeling, and then you know how to communicate that feeling so that your needs can be met. If you know someone that gets so angry that they punch their fist through drywall, that is someone that does not have an emotional vocabulary nor an emotional IQ. If you know someone that giggles when they're nervous, no emotional vocabulary, no emotional IQ. They don't know how to communicate what they're feeling, likely because they don't know what they're feeling. And you will have people that can do one and not the other. But you need both to be able to have an appropriate emotional vocabulary. So what that does for a child is they say, oh yeah, I felt this before. When I felt this way, Miss Brenna told me that I was anxious. Now I know what I'm feeling is anxiety. Now I can say to someone, I'm feeling really anxious right now, then my needs can be met. And see, if we don't get an emotional vocabulary, a child is going to behaviorally show you how they're feeling. We would always, because we're rational, we're cognitive, we have abstract reasoning, we as adults would always prefer, absolute on purpose, that a child will verbally express how they're feeling. But more often than not, kids are not verbal. They don't have an emotional vocabulary. They don't have an emotional IQ, so they will show you how they feel. And here's the big disconnect. So when a child gains an emotional vocabulary, it's huge for them. Even into adulthood, it benefits them. So that is first universal outcome. Second universal outcome is regulation. They just developed increased regulation across all environments. They are more regulated emotionally, behaviorally, mentally, socially, academically, you name it, they have increased regulation. They know how to control themselves. They know how to recognize what they need. They know how to adjust accordingly. They're not reactive. They're not explosive. They're more calm. They're more centered. They're more regulated. There are plenty of adults that do not have self-control and self-regulation. But one of the 4 universal outcomes is increased regulation. So if you have a kid that has high highs and low lows, if you have a kid that's a big feeler, if you have a kid that's sensitive, if you have a kid that seems to be impulsive or volatile, it's dysregulation, lack of self-control. They build this in CCPT. Why? Because we provide them with all kinds of choices, and they are given the freedom to have power and control over the circumstances so that they learn how to control and regulate their circumstances. Kids don't like staying stuck. Kids don't like being in a moment of dysfunction or dysregulation. Sometimes they don't know how to get out of it, but they don't like it. So they are wired to become more regulated if given the time, the tools, and the opportunity. And the play therapist and the playroom provide those conditions where a child can develop self-control. Third universal outcome, increased self-esteem. Every single one of us is on a lifelong journey for identity. We never reach a point where we've arrived. We never reach a point where there isn't more to discover about ourselves. We never reach a point where we can't have a higher level of self-esteem. And especially kids that have low self-esteem, they struggle. They don't feel equipped. They don't feel competent. They don't feel capable. They give up. They have no persistence. They have no perseverance. They don't think that they can handle anything. They live in a state of, I'm at the mercy of my circumstances. Because we encourage, because we use esteem building responses, because they have ultimate power and control in the playroom, they start to go, I'm going to try this. I'm going to see how this goes. I think I can do this. I'm going to trust myself. I can handle this. Their self-dialogue changes. And as they build self-esteem, self-worth, self-value, self-concept, all of those selves, they're increasing in all of those things. This serves them the rest of their lives. They have a more concrete awareness of who they are. They like themselves. They trust themselves. They accept themselves. If every human being on the planet had a healthy level of self-esteem, not an excessive level of self-esteem, I don't mean ego, I don't mean pride, that's not what I'm saying, but if every person had a sense of who they are and what they're capable of, and they liked themselves and they trusted themselves, we would live in a very different world. So that's the third universal outcome. The fourth is increased worldview. And this has a little bit of a different connotation than how you might know the term worldview in other contexts. In this scenario, an increased worldview for a child is, as kids, they live myopically I-centered. In other words, it's me, myself, and I at all times. It's this moment. It's how I feel. It's an experience, and it all comes back to me. That is age appropriate. That is developmentally appropriate. Please don't ever resent your kids. Please don't ever get angry at your kids. Please don't ever feel irritated about the fact that kids are self-centered. That is how they're supposed to be. But what child-centered play therapy does for them, because it introduces the relationship component with the therapist, kids learn, I don't like how I feel when I cheated at that game. I don't like how I feel when I hurt that person's feelings. I don't like how I feel when I injured that person because I was reckless. I don't like how I feel when fill in the blank. That comes from relationship in the playroom. It comes from the unconditional love and acceptance that we provide to kids. Kids behave in self-enhancing ways when there is a solid relationship there. So the relationship comes from the therapist, and the child is able to say, I don't want to live like that. I'm learning that actions have consequences. I'm learning that my behaviors influence more than just me. There's an impact beyond just this moment. It's not just here and now about my needs. If I say something, it hurts people. If I do something, it has an outcome that's negative. There are consequences. And they learn over time to avoid outcomes that they don't like. It's an increased worldview. And what's fascinating is these universal outcomes work together. In other words, as the child increases their self-esteem, they naturally increase their regulation. As they increase their regulation, they naturally increase their worldview. As they increase their worldview, they are building a more robust emotional vocabulary. So now they're able to communicate more effectively, which allows them to regulate, which builds their self-esteem. You can see how this builds. So one skill and acquisition begets the growth of others. And it becomes this really interesting swirl of all of these growing and continuing to heal the child. Also in conjunction with the individual work that the child is doing. Keep in mind, these are the 4 universal outcomes. Every kid will experience these 4, in addition to whatever else they're working on independently. So the notion that CCPT is going to help your child with what's going on right now, that's absolutely true. But the greater notion that it will help them develop things that will benefit them for the rest of their lives, that every parent would want for their kids, potentially more important and true. Because I don't know any parent that would say they don't want those 4 outcomes for their children. And CCPT provides it. So it's really exciting to watch these develop in kids and watch this come to fruition as we provide child-centered play therapy to the clients with whom we work. So I hope that that gives you a sense of what the universal outcomes are and how they're acquired. And obviously, if you are not working with a play therapist, these are things that you can help your children develop with the skills that we've talked about. So if you reflect feelings, if you encourage and esteem build, if you provide choices, these are what help your children develop those kinds of outcomes. So that's a powerful tool that you can use in your parenting as well. If you would like to reach out to me, I would love to hear from you. Brenna@thekidcounselor.com. I love y'all. Thanks for pouring into your kids. We'll talk again soon. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Play Therapy Parenting Podcast with Dr. Brenna Hicks. For more episodes and to subscribe to our newsletter, please go to www.playtherapyparenting.com.